I grew up in a small town in northern Utah in the early 70s, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and gossip spread faster than the winter winds off the mountains. I was in 8th grade at the time, and my homeroom teacher was Mr. Larson. He was a younger teacher, maybe mid-30s, who taught history and coached track on the side. He wasn't the type to joke around a lot, but he was fair, and he treated students like adults, which made most of us respect him. Our school was small, just a single building that housed grades 7 through 12, and the staff turnover was almost non-existent. Teachers would stay for decades, so when someone suddenly wasn't there, people noticed right away. Mr. Larson had been with us since the start of the school year, and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary with him. He showed up every day in his same corduroy jacket and tie, carrying stacks of papers under his arm. He was reliable to the point of routine. Then, one Monday in February, he simply wasn't there. No warning, no substitute waiting in his place. Just an empty desk and the principal coming in to say, "Mr. Larson won't be teaching here anymore." No explanation was given. At 13, I didn't think much beyond maybe he got another job. But as the days went on, the way the adults around school avoided talking about it started to make the whole thing feel much stranger. At first, we all assumed it was something simple, like he'd moved away or had a family emergency. But whenever kids asked questions, the staff shut it down right away. I remember one girl asked in the office if we could send him a card, and the secretary just said, "That won't be necessary," without looking up from her typewriter. Even the principal, who normally treated us like friends more than students, wouldn't give a straight answer. A couple weeks later, I was walking home and overheard my parents talking with a neighbor on our porch. They didn't notice me listening, but I clearly heard his name. The neighbor said something like, "They found his car out near Antelope Island, just sitting there, keys still inside." My parents hushed him quickly when they saw me standing there, but by then I'd already heard enough. That was the first time it hit me. He hadn't just left. He was missing. After that, kids started sharing their own bits of gossip. One boy swore he saw Mr. Larson walking near the old rail yard late at night the week before he vanished. Another said the police had been asking questions about him in town. Most of it was probably just rumor, but the fact that none of the adults denied it made it worse. By the end of the month, every student was whispering about what might have happened, and the hallways felt different, like a piece of the routine had been ripped out and replaced with something heavy and unspoken. By spring, the school brought in a new teacher, but it didn't erase the feeling that something was wrong. Mr. Larson's desk was still in the corner, his handwriting still on the chalkboard ledge. And sometimes, when the room was quiet, it felt like everyone was waiting for him to walk back in. I remember during one fire drill, I glanced into the office and saw 2 police officers sitting with the principal. They had a folder open on the desk, and I recognized Mr. Larson's staff photo clipped to the front. Years later, I found out from an old newspaper that his disappearance was never solved. The car by Antelope Island was real, and apparently there were no signs of a struggle inside. No money taken, no suitcase missing from his house. He had just vanished. Reading that article made me think back to little things I hadn't questioned then, like the time he left class in the middle of a lesson to take a phone call and came back looking pale, or how he always double-checked that the classroom door was locked before we left for recess. Even now, when I drive through Farmington or past the causeway out to the island, I think about him, about how an ordinary school year can suddenly turn into something you never forget, and about how a person you saw almost every day could disappear without a trace, leaving a silence that still feels heavier than any answer we never got. In 1971, I was living in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. I was 22 at the time and working odd jobs while attending university classes part-time. My girlfriend, Amira, was 20 and worked the evening shift at a small textile factory on the outskirts of the city. We didn't have a car. Neither of us could afford one. So she usually walked about 20 minutes to and from work. The roads weren't too busy at night, but Sarajevo was safe enough back then that we never thought much of it. One evening, Amira showed up at my apartment looking shaken. She told me a man driving a dark green truck had been following her almost the whole way home. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. Maybe he just lived nearby. But every time she turned onto another street, the truck slowed behind her. She tried crossing to the other side, and he pulled alongside for a short stretch before continuing. She said she ducked into a side road near the market and sprinted the last few blocks until she reached my place. I asked if she recognized him, maybe someone from the neighborhood, but she shook her head. She said she couldn't even see his face clearly. It was too dark, and he stayed in the cab. I tried to calm her down, saying maybe it was nothing, but she insisted something about the way he drove, crawling behind her with his headlights dimmed, felt deliberate. That was the first time she mentioned the truck, but it wouldn't be the last. A few days later, she brought it up again. This time, she said the truck had waited near the end of the street before she even left work. Her shift ended around 10 p.m., and as she walked out with a couple of other girls, she noticed the same green truck parked across from the factory gates. She said she tried to ignore it, but when the group split up and she was walking alone, the truck pulled out and started crawling behind her again. That night, she came straight to me almost in tears. I remember she kept saying, "He knows my route." I didn't want to dismiss it anymore, so I offered to walk her to and from work until we figured it out. The first 2 nights I went with her, nothing happened. The streets were quiet, no green truck anywhere. I began to think maybe she had overreacted, or that the guy had given up once he noticed she wasn't walking alone. But on the 3rd night, we saw it. Halfway back to my place, the truck appeared from a side street and started creeping up behind us. It was late and the road was almost empty, so the sound of the engine stood out. I grabbed Amira's hand and quickened the pace. The truck stayed about 20 meters back, moving slowly, keeping distance. When we finally turned down the block toward my apartment building, it stopped at the corner. The headlights shut off, and we could feel the driver watching us. The next morning, I went back to that corner where the truck had stopped. There were tire marks in the dirt by the roadside, like it had been sitting there a while. I asked a couple of neighbors if they'd noticed a green truck around, and one older man told me he'd seen it parked near the small market a few times, just sitting with the driver inside smoking. He said he thought it was strange because the man never went inside to buy anything. That same week, Amira's supervisor arranged for another coworker to give her rides home. For a while, things were fine, but one night, the coworker's car broke down, and Amira had to walk again. She said she made it about halfway, when she heard an engine behind her. She turned and saw the same truck crawling along, no headlights on this time. She ran to a nearby bakery where the owner was still cleaning up for the night. She told him someone was following her, and he locked the door and let her stay inside until I arrived. We went to the police the next day, but all they told us was to write down the license plate if we saw it again. The problem was, whenever we looked back, the plate was always covered in mud. That was the last time Amira ever walked alone at night. Her uncle started picking her up from work, and we never saw the green truck again. But even now, decades later, she swears that if she ever did, she'd recognize the way it moved. The slow, deliberate crawl of someone who wasn't just driving, but hunting. I was 17, living in Dutchess County, and my friends and I had been dying to see the Allman Brothers Band play at the Fillmore East in Manhattan. We didn't have much money, so hitchhiking seemed like the only way to make it happen. It was a cold Saturday in March 1971, and the air still smelled like winter. We'd packed a couple of backpacks, some sandwiches, and a portable transistor radio to keep us company on the road. We'd gotten lucky almost immediately. A beat-up green Chevy pulled over after we stuck our thumbs out near Poughkeepsie. The driver, a man in his late 30s with a shaggy beard and sunglasses, seemed friendly enough. He asked where we were headed, and we told him Manhattan. He nodded and laughed, saying he loved that band too. The ride started off normal. He played the radio, cracked jokes, and even offered us snacks from a paper bag on the passenger seat. My friends and I relaxed, joking and singing along to the songs, feeling like this was part of the adventure. But somewhere past Tarrytown, the energy changed. He didn't take the usual exits or slow down when traffic signs warned of turns. Every time one of us tried to ask a question, he'd grin and wave it off. There was a tension in the air we couldn't explain at first, like the music on the radio was too quiet or too fast. I remember glancing out the side window and noticing the landscape wasn't familiar. Trees and empty roads stretching farther than they should have. That's when I started to feel that something was off, but I kept hoping it was just part of the city traffic tricking my mind. By the time we realized something was wrong, we were well past any familiar landmarks. The driver hadn't said a word in several miles, and the radio had gone silent. My friends started to get nervous, whispering to each other about turning around or asking him to stop. I tried to make small talk, laughing and asking about the band, anything to break the silence, but he didn't respond. The only thing that moved was the car, steady, relentless, like he was on autopilot. I remember the way the shadows from the trees flicked across his face in the late afternoon sun, making him look sharper, almost predatory. I spotted a narrow dirt road that split off the highway, and we all leaned toward it, hoping he might take it to let us out. But he just shook his head, murmuring something we couldn't hear, and kept going straight. That's when panic set in. My stomach twisted. My friends were clutching their bags, and I could feel the tension in the car like static electricity. We weren't just lost. We were trapped in a moving metal box with someone who clearly didn't intend to stop. I realized we didn't know anything about him, not his name, where he lived, or why he was driving alone. I started looking for an escape, glancing at the door handles and thinking of kicking out a window. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him glance at me. Not a friendly glance, but a slow, calculating look, like he knew I was thinking about escaping. The hairs on my neck stood up. That's when the fear hit me fully. This wasn't a driver with a change of plans. He was following some other plan, and we were part of it. The world outside seemed to stretch, endless trees and road, and no one to call for help. It was getting dark, and the streetlights were becoming scarce. I tried calling out to him again, but he didn't respond. Just kept his eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel. My friends started whispering, arguing over whether we should try to grab the wheel, but I knew that would be dangerous. We were in the middle of nowhere, and if he wanted to, he could take us anywhere. The radio crackled faintly, but no one was there, just static. It made the car feel smaller, like the world outside had disappeared. Finally, a glimmer of hope. A small roadside diner with neon lights flickering on. I pointed it out, trying to sound casual. "Hey, maybe we could grab a soda," I said, keeping my voice light. He didn't answer at first, then slowly turned the car toward the lot. The relief was immediate but cautious. As he parked, I noticed the way he kept glancing at us in the rearview mirror, that same unnerving, measured stare. My hands shook as I opened my door first and motioned for my friends to follow. We didn't wait to see if he was going to say anything. We bolted into the diner, our bags dragging behind us. The man didn't follow. By the time the police arrived, called by the diner's manager who'd noticed our frantic entrance, he was gone. They searched the roads, but he had vanished without a trace. My friends and I never hitchhiked again, and every time I see a car approaching slowly from behind, my stomach still tightens. I never found out who he was or what he wanted that day. All I know is that for a while, he had complete control, and the sense of helplessness is something I'll never forget.